Hey everyone, welcome back to Tallulah Talks. That is me, and today it is Saturday, which means it is time for Saturday's Haunting Hour. This one I kind of actually heard about through a podcast. I can't remember what it was called, but I'll be sure to leave it in the description box below. Again, apologies for the bird, can't do anything about it. So this case is called the House of 200 Demons, and it was about this family who was terrorised and tormented by, I don't know if it was just like one shadow figure or multiple entities, but I think they only lived in the house for like 8 months or something, or maybe like 6 or 7 months. And the names were changed in the podcast, so I've just gone with the names that were in the podcast, but I also did my own research as well. I don't mention the children's names because the mother doesn't want her names mentioned. So let's get started. So there was actually a documentary made about this case, and I'm not sure what it's called, but again, I'm sure it has the guy from Ghost Adventures. I'm sure that he did a documentary, and again, I'll put it in the description below. So this house was actually known as the Demon House, and it is known as the most haunted house in Indiana. And there were many witnesses to these events, including police. Like I said, the names were changed due to the mother's request. So the house was described as pretty small, very uninteresting, nothing unique or anything about it, just a normal small house. And Theresa, her mother Rhonda, and the 3 children believed this was the perfect house for them. The children were really excited to find a home, and it was just kind of described as like a plain rental cottage. And the children were excited about having this brand new house and getting into their new rooms. And they were aged at the time 7, 9 and 12. Theresa and her mum Rhonda worked really hard on the house, so like decorating it, getting furniture moved in, and eventually it did begin to look like a home. And this was in December of 2011. So one chilly night in December, Rhonda, Theresa's mother, had put a gown on and went to make some coffee, and she described the house as being deathly silent at this time. The kids were sleeping, and Rhonda began hearing like very loud, heavy buzzing, and she turned around and she saw like a fly in her face, and she kind of whacked it away. And then she turned towards the porch, and it was described as like a black cloud of flies, and she had never seen anything like this before. So at this time, Theresa also came into the kitchen, and she saw what Rhonda was looking at, and it just shocked her because she had never seen anything like this before, and it legitimately created a black cloud of flies. They decided to call the exterminator the next day, and he disposed of all the flies, and he had said he had never seen anything like this before, but the flies were disposed of. However, more came back, and this was a daily occurrence, so much so that they actually got used to all these flies being there. They did everything to try and get rid of the flies. However, nothing could be done. The exterminator had already been called out. He had already killed the first bunch of flies. And they also went to talk to the neighbours to see if this was like a common occurrence in the area, but the neighbours had never had anything like this happen to them. Like I said, the family did get used to this, and one night Theresa lay awake, very cold in her bedroom, and she was kind of listening because I think maybe something woke her up, and she could hear footsteps coming from the basement. So she kind of started to believe this was an intruder. However, she knew in herself there would be no one there because this had been happening for a couple of nights. She went then to investigate, and in the hallway she also saw Rhonda, her mother, straining to listen and hear these footsteps. And then at this point, the footsteps, it was like they were coming up the stairs towards the basement door. And they heard the creaks that the stairs made as these footsteps were coming up. And at this time, they'd kind of discovered it's coming out of the basement. So both women ran into their rooms and locked their doors, because obviously they were petrified. This was quite scary for them. And they heard like the doorknob like turning and the basement door opening. And like I say, she was very scared. Both women couldn't breathe. At this time, I think Theresa had opened her door a little bit, just because she wanted to see what was, making these footsteps. So as soon as she heard the footsteps like come near her door, she burst into the hallway and there was nothing there. But she did note that when she went into this area, it was absolutely freezing, and she also saw wet footprints that had stopped just outside of her door. But again, this became something that the family got used to. Like they would hear it every night. It was just something that they got used to as part of living in the house. They, like I said, tried locking the basement doors, so it might stop the footsteps from coming up stairs towards the bedrooms, but that didn't work. And the kids actually began complaining about hearing the footsteps, believing it to be Rhonda and Theresa just stomping around at night. At this point, items in the home would move of their own accord and show up in like really odd places, but there were 3 children in the house, so they kind of just put it down to that. But things kind of got progressively worse, because all the family began to see shadows out of the corner of their eye, but then when they turned around, the shadows would be gone. One day, this shadow figure lunged at Theresa, and Theresa screamed, but the moment the kind of shadow came this close, it just disappeared. There was also instances of the shadow destroying religious objects within the house. It never said if they were like a religious family, but I think it's quite common in America. The majority of Americans are religious, so some of them may have religious memorabilia. So the kids actually began missing school because of these occurrences, because they couldn't sleep at night and they just weren't getting enough sleep. And like I say, they were awake most nights. And Theresa, obviously trying to find a plausible explanation for all this, she began thinking that it was hallucinations due to lack of sleep. Because when your brain doesn't get enough rest, you can get visual and auditory hallucinations. So this had been going on for quite a few months, and on March 10th, 2012, the family were having like a wake at the home because they were mourning a death. And Theresa went to check on the kids. I think they were all upstairs in their bedrooms. And she went to check on her 12-year-old first, and she kind of was taken aback, and she screamed the house down calling for her mum, and this actually caused a flood of guests to kind of come up to the bedroom to see what was happening, and they were all witness to what was happening. And everyone in the house saw the 12-year-old child levitating feet up above her bed, and she was still asleep. She didn't actually even remember this when she woke up. And the family at this point began praying, and slowly the child just kind of went back down to the bed. And she did wake up, and she was kind of wondering like what all these people were doing in her bedroom and in the middle of the night. And they said to her what had happened, and she did not remember a thing. It was at this point they decided to try and get some help involved with the local churches, but no one at the churches really wanted to get involved. It's not said as to why they didn't want to get involved. They just didn't want to get involved, and things did get worse. Clairvoyance also became aware of the activity that was going on in the house, and all had different interpretations of what was going on, with one clairvoyant saying that there was 200 demons within the house, and that is why it's called the House of 200 Demons. The church eventually, it's one of the churches in the area that eventually got in contact with the family and helped them cleanse the house and cleanse the family. And he advised them to use oil and draw crosses on the children, on like the children's heads, and all over the house to kind of keep whatever this entity was out. So the family did this immediately. They covered the kids in oil, drew crosses on them with their hands, and they did this with everything within the house as well. And it was also the advice of a clairvoyant, which Theresa took, to build an altar within the basement and have statues of Mary, Joseph, and Jesus. She was also advised to leave the Bible on Psalm 91. Quote, "You will not fear the terror of the night, nor the hour that..." Oh, sorry, I can't read my own writing. "That flies by day, nor the presence that stalks the darkness." I think that's what it says. My writing's terrible. So at this time, everything was quiet for a little while. However, not long after this, the activity did get worse, and it mainly centred around the 3 children. The kids began displaying very disturbing behaviour, and it was claimed by Theresa and Rhonda that the kids' eyes would bulge or they would roll to the back of their heads. They would also begin growling and barking like animals. However, they never had any memory of doing this, so it was like whatever was in the house was possibly possessing them because they had no memory of it. They would also speak in really weird, what was described as demonic voices, and they would just faint as well all of a sudden for no reason, and when they did, they couldn't be woken up. They would also say very odd, quite terrifying things. Quote, "It's time to die." That I think her son said, one of her sons said that in a voice that wasn't his. And he was also accused of attacking his siblings during these episodes. And Theresa herself was also said to be possessed at some point. The church got more involved with this and decided to investigate. And on many instances, the priest actually witnessed the children being possessed and acting in like really strange ways. They observed flickering lights and moving objects, and this included a bottle levitating across the room. The priest did try helping the family, and they tried performing exorcisms and cleansings on the house. Unfortunately, this didn't work. And it was at this point as well, the Department of Child Services got involved. I think because maybe the neighbours had reported the way the kids were acting, and also the kids weren't going to school very often, so that might have flagged them up. But when one of the workers actually came to the house to maybe like interview the children, she actually witnessed some of the paranormal activity. And one of the workers actually observed the son walking backwards and then like up the wall, almost defying gravity. And it was actually the case manager that saw this. Her name was Valerie, and she actually later spoke about what she saw, and this is a quote. "He walked up the wall, flipped over, and stood there. I believe that something was going on here out of the realm of normal living." So even people who may not believe in this type of thing were actually witness to these odd things that were happening by an invisible force. Although they did believe something strange was going on, the children were still taken out of Theresa's custody for a couple of months, I believe. Police were also witness to this as well, and a captain claimed to have taken photos of the house, I guess, and it actually showed weird shapes on the phone. And he also captured, like on recording, I guess, a disembodied voice. Like I said, the children were taken from Theresa for about 6 months whilst the services continued to investigate. However, they were returned to Theresa. Imagine that, like, that's really scary. So the story of the haunting did hit headlines, and this encouraged more people to come and investigate. The family then hired Father Michael Maginot to perform an exorcism. I don't think this worked, but after interviewing the family in 2012, he concluded that they were being haunted by several demons. He performed 3 exorcisms on the house and 1 on the mother, but unfortunately this didn't work, and the family eventually decided to move out of the house and move to Indianapolis, where when they moved, the events stopped and nothing like this happened to them from that instance, from what I know. The house was then purchased a few years later, I think in 2015, 2016, by Zach Baggins, who is the host of Ghost Adventures. And this is where he filmed the documentary. However, the activity did continue with the filming crew in the house. Zach actually became very seriously ill not long after filming, not long after he moved in and when filming began. And he also had a crew member who he believed had been possessed, and that crew member immediately quit the filming. And unfortunately, while he was filming, he did ignore the advice of priests. He never cleansed the house. He never did anything religious. He kind of just got on with it, and they had a lot of technical issues and some freak accidents as well. And after filming was complete in 2016, Baggins actually had the house torn down. However, according to the priest, because no cleansing had taken place, the evil actually still resides there. And that is the story of the demon house, which, like I said, the house has been torn down. The family have not had any instance since then. So it must have been contained within the house. However, because, like the priest said, Zach Baggins didn't do any of their advice, it is believed that whatever had haunted that house is still there. And that, oh my god, that must have been terrifying, especially seeing your children in such a state and having them taken off you. But there were so many witnesses. Family were witness to it, police, the caseworkers, and even the Zach Baggins and his crew members on Ghost Adventures. I will put down below what the documentary is called, because I can't really remember, and I'll also put down below the podcast I listened to as part of my research. And as this is the kind of content you like, definitely hit that subscribe button. And if you have any cases for me you'd like me to look into, leave a comment below.